Great. Okay, well, welcome to week 10, the lecture on using theory. So, actually, Kathleen, can I get you to mute the microphone there?
Yep.
I'm just getting some background noise, that's all.
I've just muted myself.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to follow on from Kathleen's lecture and give you an example of a project that we worked on with University of Sunshine Coast on developing a social marketing strategy for the Commonwealth Government, the Department of Education, on how to engage low socioeconomic status communities and in particular how to encourage high school children to think about life beyond school and go on to do a TAFE or some sort of trade certificate or university. So we're talking about how do we basically help kids transition from school to get some sort of qualification. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about the project that we did, and in particular I'm going to focus on the use of theories to develop the strategy. In your assignment, that's something that you're going to need to focus on. Okay. So just recapping, this was a social marketing approach. So we know that social marketing seeks to, integrate with other approaches. We spoke about that, well, I spoke about that in the lecture a few weeks ago, where there is there's no magic approach, there's no silver bullet. We need to work with different approaches, but social marketing has a role to play that is unique. So typically we find that the education approach is all about awareness. It's about telling people what to do. Law and policy is about making people do a behaviour, and then social marketing is all about helping people and assisting people and giving them the support, services and goods that they need in order to enact whatever the behaviour is that you're trying to achieve. Okay, so this is the brief that we were given by the Commonwealth Department of Education. So it was to create a social marketing strategy that increased the number of domestic students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds to participate in tertiary education in Australia. And as I said, this was not just university, it was also TAFEs and colleges. So the statistics that we had, which was the impetus for this, is that 25% of the population in Australia is classified as low socioeconomic status. However, only 16% of that population participates in any form of higher education. So you can see there's a gap. In terms of specific groups that are classified as low SES, we've got culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So you can see there's a gap there of almost 1% where they under-participate. People with a disability, we've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and we've got people in regional and remote areas. So basically the gap between the representation in the population and the representation in the participation in education is something that the government is focused on and trying to bring the participation on par with the representation. So these are the metrics that they use in order to determine whether or not a strategy is working. And clearly there's no one single approach. The social marketing strategy was one part of a much broader program of initiatives by the Department of Education, and it's not something that can be achieved overnight. It's generational change, but we were a little piece of the puzzle here. So the approach that we took and what we were required to take was we had to build on extensive widening participation outreach scholarship. So the work done in the literature about widening the participation in the tertiary sector. We needed to complement and reinforce outreach practice. So these are things like open days, visits to school, all the face-to-face work that occurs in the sector. We needed to be integrative, so we needed to reach people in the right place. We needed to integrate with research, and we needed to integrate with cohorts or target markets. It had to be holistic, and it needed to be national. So we proposed a digital platform to integrate current activities in local practice, because for the budget that we were told we were developing for, which was about $1 million, $1.5 million, there's no way you could do that at a national level in any meaningful way without it being digital. We needed to focus on the strengths of people and fostering empowerment rather than the deficit approach where people are lacking something. It was more about, well, what do they already have? How do we leverage that? We needed to utilise conceptual frameworks of behaviour change and psychology, and it was an all-inclusive tertiary education approach. So these were, I guess, some of the design principles that we used to build the program. So in this sector, the government measures or has the statistics around these 4 cohorts. So every year there's an annual collection of the percentage of people in the population and the percentage of people that participate in a whole range of activities, not just tertiary education. They also do it at secondary levels and they also do it across different government departments. But these were the 4 cohorts. Sitting around that, we knew that what was an important stakeholder group were influencers, so parents, family, community, because we know that that low SES citizens don't operate in a vacuum. And we know from social marketing, the word social is important. It involves other people. And then sitting around that is another group of entities, and these are the stakeholders. So there's no point in coming up with a strategy that doesn't involve tertiary institutions and also industry practitioners. Because the reason that you go and study or do something after school is to get a job. And if the study or the training is not going to be linked to the needs of the employers, then the whole thing just falls down. In the same way that when students come to university, while they're there to learn, they're also primarily there to get a job or to change jobs. And so making sure that we reflected the needs of both the employers and the tertiary institutions was going to be a very important part of the strategy. Okay, so the method that we took was quite multi-pronged. So we did some quantitative research where we did a survey of what we call proxy experts. So these are people who work very closely with people in these 4 different categories, and we got them to tell us what some of the motivators and barriers and the drivers were, and about why people did participate in tertiary education, why they didn't. What was interesting is that the findings in that survey identified that there was a lot of commonality across the cohorts. And so this started to flag to us that a target marketing strategy that we developed should not follow the usual government data collection statistical approach, that what we needed to do was to look across the cohorts, not within the cohorts. Because a kid living in Logan seemed to share the same psychological characteristics as an Indigenous teenager out in a mining town in Western Australia. And so this was something that was quite unique and different for the Commonwealth in terms of a different way of segmenting. We then followed this up with qualitative interviews, and we did 211 qualitative interviews all around the country, and I'll show you where we did those. And we did these with parents, teachers and students. So we did 39 interviews followed by workshops with 121 people. These were co-design workshops, and I'll take you through that in a moment. And then we followed it up with 51 validation interviews to make sure that what we've come up with was in fact going to be useful. So this was very much a co-creative approach to the problem. And it was very much about co-design, which is an approach that I've found just works better and better in terms of involving people in the solution strategy. So rather than us as experts do the research on people, come up with what we think is the strategy and then recommend it, actually involving the people who we're trying to help in the development of that strategy means that you come up with something that's going to resonate, it's going to work, it's going to be more meaningful. It's not an expert-led approach. So this is where we did it. Basically, we had a number of locations down the east coast of Australia, and we also had a location north of a mining town in Western Australia. We had quite a high representation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and people from with culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. That is a larger percentage than is in the population. But it was something that was very important to the Commonwealth Department of Education, and so we made sure that we incorporated these people in our sample to ensure that we were adequately representing them. You can see here the number of school leavers that we had. We had parents, school students, and school staff. So you can see by the codes there what we had in what areas. And here are the definitions of the people that we spoke to. Interestingly, we decided that we were going to start talking to high school kids from grade 7 upwards. Typically, most programs that are developed for high school students tend to be from year 10 onwards. But one of the things that we found very quickly with speaking to the experts is that a lot of kids make decisions about what they're doing after school from grade 7. And that if you leave it until grade 10 or later, it's too late. You know, they're not doing the right subjects, or the mindset's not there, or they've already sort of checked out of the process. So getting to the students before they make that decision and commitment is really important. And that, again, was something new and quite unique to this research. So from that, and thinking back again when I said we were cutting across the cohorts, we developed 4 different groups of personas. So again, we use personas to represent our target markets. So we had a set of personas for high school students, a set of personas for recent school leavers, a set of personas for parents, and a set for school staff. And we had 4 personas here, 4 personas for school leavers, 3 for parents and 3 for school staff. I'm going to take you through those. So we ended up with quite a lot of personas overall, and I'll explain how we developed those. You can see here that we're using animals. So one of the things that we wanted to be able to do with our personas was to have people be able to do a quiz and to be able to have some customer-facing materials that are public. Now, when you have materials that are not just internal but external, it creates a difficulty in that you need to use images and photos of personas. As soon as you put an image up of, you know, a white male who's 19 years old, immediately, you know, the older non-white, non-male, older people just go, well, that's not me, that doesn't resonate. And there is no way that you can remove individual characteristics from a photograph without having no photograph at all. So we ended up choosing animals because they were non-gender specific, they were ethnically neutral, age neutral, and also they're fun. It's a fun way of communicating with people. And so we anthropomorphize the animals. So you can see that they look a bit human-like with their T-shirts and the way that they're standing. So that anthropomorphization, that is giving human qualities to an object like an animal, is also a way of increasing the resonance. And people do respond. We know that people respond to characters on TV like Louis the Fly for Mortine that are anthropomorphized. And there's lots and lots of characters that we've seen that where this is done. So what I'd like to do now is just take a moment and get you to work out what student persona that you might be. So if you can click on the link here, there's about 7 questions. So pull out your devices, https://tinyurl.com/which-student, and that will take you to our quiz. So let's see which student personas we have in the room, and then the rest of the presentation will be a little more meaningful. So I'm going to click on that myself and bring that up. And you just need to start the quiz by selecting the various questions. So play along with me. I'm just going to pick random ones. When you get to this screen here, you don't need to log in. Just click here, continue without an account, and then that will bring up the scores. Kathleen, can you let me know when most students seem to have finished? Because I can't see anyone.
Sure thing. Just want to raise your hand when you're finished.
Great.
just finishing Rebecca.
Okay, and then Kathleen, can you just ask people to sort of indicate which persona they were?
Sure.
And we've got 4 out there. I'm going to take you through those in a moment. Actually, we'll come back to that when I actually bring them up on screen. It might be a bit easier. So
Yeah, do you know which 4? Because I don't know which
yeah,
4.
that's all right. Just note them down, and when I get to that, we'll come to it.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So continuing on. Okay, so basically, we developed the personas based on the literature review we'd done. So this is what we already knew about the motivators and barriers, about why people participate or don't participate in tertiary education. So we knew that there were specific attitudes and values. We knew that there were specific motivators and barriers. We also knew that self-identity, how people see themselves. Do they see themselves as a uni student? Do they see themselves as a tradie? And the role of place. So if you live a long way away from these institutions, that can be quite scary. And people sort of see themselves, no, I'm regional and remote, and I don't go to the big city to do that kind of training. The role of education in the life of the family and the individual was also important. We know that people make different decisions about tertiary study based on their demographics and their life stage. And we also know how people identify with other groups, you know, what kinds of people go to uni, what kinds of people don't. And we also knew that different media and communication strategies also can inform the different personas. So taking all of that background knowledge, and there is a report on our project website that summarises all of the literature, that combined with the interviews led to the creation of these personas. So in the student personas, we come up with 4 different types. You'll notice here that the coloured dots are kind of moving across to the right, and it does the same for each of the different groups. So past and present learners were students at school, but also recent school leavers. So we developed the same personas because there was no real differences between a kid who finished last year in year 12 and a grade 8. So we've got a series of criteria here. I know that they're not wildly clear, but it's all about the approach to making a career. So it's whether, you know, it's about a journey or whether it's about, you know, a race to the finish. It's all about the kind of approach that they take. Do they leave things open, or is it a really focused angle? So the Tassie Devil is very much a planned approach to the future careers. A lot of the younger students who had decided what they wanted to do already were Tassie Devils, and it's just about getting there quick. The opposite type of learner for that is the Wallaby, who jumps all around, hasn't quite decided it. They're in year 12 and they're still trying to figure out, you know, what they're going to do. They haven't picked the right subjects potentially. Everything is still open, and they like a bit of fun. The bowerbird learner, like the bowerbird likes to collect shiny objects, and that's all about the money, the success that will come from the career. And the frill-neck lizard is not quite as undecided as the wallaby learner, but is not as quite as focused on the outcome as the Tassie Devil. So you can sort of see the dots there move around. We also had parents, and what we found was parenting style distinguished between the parents, the way that they approached guiding and helping their child, from the penguin parent, where it was very student-centred, the child leads, whether the child's right or not, to the magpie parent, that's a bit like the tiger mum, that they're, you know, super, you're doing this and I'm just going to make sure that nothing gets in your way, very focused on the outcome. And then we had school staff. Here we use different birds that represent different closeness to the students. So the wood duck is like right on the ground, really nurturing in the classroom kind of teacher, to the pelican school staff that tended to be more the principals and heads of disciplines that were a little more remote, higher above, had a bit more of a bird's eye view of the students, but didn't necessarily have any close interaction. And then you had the Kookaburra school staff who were sort of in the middle, and they had different approaches to how they would guide and advise students in selecting a career. So knowing what the personas were, we then needed to say, well, what are we going to do? What's the strategy going to be? And this is where the theory came in. So we did not go into the first set of interviews with any really strong theory. We allowed the people themselves and the data to tell that story. So from that data from the interviews, we worked out there was two theories that were going to work here. One of them is social support theory, and one of them is stages of change. Kathleen, have you covered either of these theories so far?
Yes, we covered both today.
Great. Okay. All right. So these were the two that popped out to us that thought this reflected the motivations and barriers and the attitudes of people towards education. So we knew that people didn't go to tertiary education if they lacked one of these areas. And that came out quite strongly through the data. So when doing the social marketing plan, looking at what the pest analysis says in the environmental analysis, looking at the profiles of the target market tells you what the theory is that is going to be useful to develop the strategy. So that front end of the plan drives the theory framework selection. We also selected stage of change because we found that depending on where people were in the decision process, made a difference in terms of whether or not they considered going to tertiary education. So if they're a year 12 student and they're only in the contemplation stage, it's pretty well too late. They've probably not got the right subjects, they've not got the right study habits. They're not going to necessarily go on to uni or TAFE straight after school. That might take a little longer for them. Whereas if they're in, grade 10, they've already taken action, they're doing the subjects, they're getting the work experience, they're really thinking about what the options might be, then those students are much more prepared to make a decision about where they're going to go. And so these were the two theories that we then combined. So how did we do that? Well, the interview data that we used were, and these are just a little bit of selection. One of the things we got people to do was we gave them a series of photos of people and said, which of these people are most likely to study at tertiary education? Which ones are most likely to not? Now, there's no right or wrong. In fact, all of these students study. What we were interested in was people's perceptions of, just based on appearance, what they thought. And it's a way of unpacking some of the subconscious sort of motivations or even biases about what study looks like. The reason we wanted to do this is because people who don't identify with someone who studies at university are far less likely to attend. So if you've got a whole group of people that look a certain way or dress a certain way and you don't fit into that group, then you won't see yourself as part of that group. And so we got people to talk us through, why did you pick these people? Why did you pick these people? And then at the end we said, well, actually all of these people are studying at university or TAFE. And we did actually have permission to use these images. We also got people to draw a storyboard. We said, what makes you happy? What would you want to do? What's important to you in life? And we got them to draw out images. And then again, we got them to talk through. This is quite important when dealing with teenagers in particular. Asking people direct questions can be quite confronting. And if people don't have the vocabulary, and a lot of these kids didn't have the vocabulary to articulate answers, you end up with yes and no answers, and there's not a lot of meaning. The other thing is when people are drawing and they're not looking at you and making eye contact, it relaxes them and they start to talk. Boys in particular, we found it was very difficult to elicit responses with direct eye contact and direct questioning. Whereas when they were writing or drawing, they weren't looking at us and we were able to have more of a conversation rather than this sort of question and answer interrogation. So that technique works very well. We also got them to draw their family and friendship groups and talk to us about them. What do they do? What do they think about studying? Have any of them decided what they want to do? So these were just a few of the visual techniques that we used in the interviews to start unpacking the information. And it was from that we were then able to overlay which persona was in what stage of change. So you can see that the personas that were on the right-hand side of the previous slide are at those earlier stages. The personas that are on the left-hand side are at the later stages. So there's a reason for the way that we group them in that slide. And there will be very different strategies that we needed to develop because of that. The workshop data that we then used for the social support was, again, visual. So what happened was after we'd done the interviews, we asked people to come in to workshops and we got them to self-identify into as a persona. And then we got people to work in their persona groups. And we asked them, for someone like you, what would be something that would help them and provide support to make decisions about tertiary education? So we asked them, we gave them a digital idea. We also gave them a face-to-face interpersonal idea as well, but I'm just focusing on the digital here. And so this is some of the things that they drew up, and it was incredibly creative. One of them had like a game that you could play. Another had a website that had quite specific information about a type of career. And so you can see the way that they're drawing this out. So again, this is not an expert approach. This is the people we're wanting to work with are actually co-creating the strategies and the solutions. Now, we ended up with, 118 of these pictures, which is not an easy thing to start going, well, how do you make sense of that? How do you classify it? And that's where we went to the theory. So what we did was we went back to our 5 types of support, and we went through every single poster and worked out what kind of feature is that they've drawn up and what kind of support might that be. And so from that, we then represented and drew up icons to represent every feature that the students, the parents and the teachers had suggested, and classified them into these support types. So where someone had said an options catalogue, we thought that was informational support, so it had a little I category. Where it was a calculator about how much money could I earn in that job, we thought that was instrumental support. And so we ended up with a whole list of different kinds of tools based on the classification. And then it was a matter of them mixing and matching and saying, well, what persona liked what kind of tool. Overlaying that, we also decided to develop a digital framework. And so what we developed was very basic passive kinds of use of digital. So it's Web 1.0, more interactive kinds of digital tools. So Web 2.0, and then the proactive kind of tool, Web 3.0, that anticipates your needs and makes suggestions. So when we combined this with the different kinds of support and overlaid it with the personas, then we started to get quite a good picture. So you can see here that if we look at passive, interactive and proactive levels of digital, these were the kinds of tools that they were suggesting, and this is who wanted it. So we can see here that at the passive level, there's not huge differences across the personas, although the bowerbird seems to not need the same kinds of tools as the other 3 personas. But when we start to get to the interactive and proactive, we start seeing a little bit of a difference. So you can see here that the Tasmanian devil, the one that wants to just get to where they're going, is a little more interested in these kind of interactive events, registration for local events. Whereas the bowerbird, they're not interested at all in what's going on in local events or building their CV. So this starts to give us a much better idea of how we might develop a digital tool to appeal to these personas. Now, at this point, I'm just going to break and then ask, what did we actually have in the room? So if I go back to where are our personas, is it here? And I can't see, so Kathleen, you'll have to tell me. Do we have any Tassie Devil learners in the room?
Any Tassie Devils?
Do we have a few?
Yeah.
So for you, you people, when did you make a decision about what you were going to do after school? What grade was it in?
Year 9.
Year 9, yep. Anyone, any others? When did you decide?
Oh, we just had one other that was 60% Tassie Devil.
Okay. Tassie Devils are actually the rarer kind of persona. Again, a reason we picked Tassie Devils because they are rare. And so a Tassie Devil likes to do things on their, they tend to hate group work. Sprinting through life, they're pretty confident about their study. They know what they want. Does that sound like it describes you?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I don't mind working with groups. Not anything like that. Sometimes avoid most.
Okay. Well, that's good. Okay. Do we have any bowerbird learners in the room?
Yep. Yeah, we have a couple.
Okay. So when did you guys make the decision?
Year 11. Year 11.
Yep, a bit later. What made you, was earning potential of the career, was that an important part of the decision for you?
Sorry, what was that, Rebecca?
That you could actually make money in the job that you were going to study. Was that important?
Yeah, it was thought about.
Yep. Okay, what about frill neck lizards? Do we have any of them?
Yes, we've got 2.
Okay, so Again, they're a pretty balanced kind of persona. So when did you decide what you wanted to do?
Year 12.
Yeah, year 12. Can you see that it's getting later? Year 9, year 11, year 12. Okay, do we have any Wallaby learners?
No.
Okay, not unexpected, because Wallaby learners tend to leave it to the last minute and probably are less likely to go straight to uni from school because they just haven't got their act together. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be capable. It just means they've just not put things in place to enable that to happen. So that's how to interpret your results. So kicking back forward to where we were. Yeah. Okay, so to sort of pull that all together, what we have with our two frameworks, I'm going to give you the example from the Tassie Devil. We then developed up how we might build either a portal or an app or any people-rich kind of activities that aligned with their preferences, and how each of those provided the type of social support that they needed. And from that, we mocked up 11 different portals that had the information presented in the way that the persona liked. So the most important support tools for the Tassie Devil are the instrumental and informational, and they go up the front. Anything that was less important, it was either not on the screen, although they could expand the screen, or it was just down the bottom. So the way we designed up the mock-ups was very much based on the core motivations and on where they were in the stage of change and the type of support that they wanted. So without that theory, we couldn't have developed this. We mocked it up for each of our personas. So in terms of the national strategy, we recommended a digital portal that leveraged the existing people-rich outreach work. So if there was activities going on or face-to-face seminars or campus tours or whatever it is, you could access that information digitally. And the digital content would then bring together the stakeholders, the influencers and the learners in a way that was multimodal, supportive, but quite personalised. The idea would be, I'll come actually to how it would work. So why we thought it would work is because a digital portal overcomes these barriers and leverages these motivations. So remember, you're writing up in the social marketing plan the motivations and barriers. Well, in the assignment, we want to see a close connection between that front end information and the justification for why you're doing the strategy that you're doing. And this is why we know that this overcomes the barriers, leverages the motivations. So we mocked up an online portal. Now, a portal is not the same as a website. A portal simply sucks in information in an aggregated way. In fact, you can automate a lot of this. It doesn't tend to provide a lot of new information, but it just directs people to where they need to go. So that was quite important because the department did not want another website. There's already a lot of tools that are already out there, and it was just a matter of trying to pull them all in a way that didn't create information overload, but laid it out in a way that was appropriate to the needs of the persona. So depending on whether you're a school staff, student or parent, tertiary education, recent leaver or industry practitioner, you'd go in and you'd have your own, little page. So again, that's how it might look on a phone. What was important here is that it allowed for the personalised experience and people didn't have to spend too long searching. One of the problems is there is a lot of information out there for people, but it's just like, where do you start? And it's not all into one place. So in terms of summarising the persona profile and then how that specifically led into the development of one of the mock-ups, this is the Tassie Devil. And you can see the theoretical framework, the stage of change. They're at the action phase. What kind of social support did they need? Network. What were the motivators to encourage school study? What were the barriers? So that came out of the interviews. And so it gave us a key message or a positioning strategy, I guess, of fast track your dream job. And this sort of just summarises who they are. And from that, we would then, in real life, have designed up this kind of portal where it's, again, fast track the dream job. They already know what they want to do. They're not, where do I start? That's a different persona. Here's where you can go and find out information. Here's the day in the life of a police officer. They already know. So the videos that we would have made and put up would be ones already about careers. Whereas another school leaver doesn't know what they want to do, so there's no point in putting videos up of specific careers because they don't even know what career they want. They're not as far down the track. So if we then look at the frill-neck lizard, they're still contemplating what they want to do. Again, they've got network, motivators and barriers. They need to go, what do I want to be? And so their page is different. You'll see there's no video here about what the job is because they've got to decide that. And so what we would have is videos of how people made their decisions, how they achieved what they did. We would have profile builder. What kinds of things do you want to do? Explore the options now. Live chat to someone, get information. So it's really about that beginning step. And so each of the mock-ups are presented in our project report, which I will give you the link to in a moment. And you can see how we translated the information from the theoretical frameworks that we knew about each persona into a strategy. And so this is just a bit of a snapshot about the kind of examples and features that we would have for each of those different personas. Now, next week you'll be covering evaluation. So again, if you want to know how to write up an evaluation strategy, we've got that in our project report as well. And we use the logic model, which Kathleen will talk to you about next week. And so this is an example of how you might use that for a program such as ours. And so Kathleen will go through that. And Kathleen, if you want to revisit this next week, that's not a problem. And then you're going to have to do a budget. So this was the budget that we basically put together to roll this out. Now, we had a budget we were working to. So we knew it needed to be about $1.5 million. And so we just worked backwards from that. So it's easy when you know what the amount is to work backwards. And so this will just give you a bit of an idea, you know, of how much things might cost for a program such as the one that that we've done. We ended up coming in at about 2.5 million because the staffing cost was outside of the implementation budget. So the whole thing is about $2.5 million. So if you want to know more, if you go to this website, it's got all of our project reports. There's about 33 different projects we've got there. So if you just select the education project category, and then you'll see the images of the personas, and it's called Widening Participation. And there's a whole bunch of different reports, summary reports and full in-depth reports there about what we did and all the theories we used and how we did it. So I will stop it there and ask if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask.
Does anyone have any questions? Incredible amount of work that went into this project.
This was pretty big. It took us 12 months project. And in fact, one of your tutors, Natalie, was one of the research assistants on this project. It was pretty daunting, and we still don't know what the federal government's going to do with it. They did very much like the personas, but I think they didn't quite know what to do with the digital at this stage, and there were some changes going on internally. So we'd like to think that something will happen with it, but I think it's a good example of how to use data and theory to bring about a strategy. And to be honest, if I didn't have those theoretical frameworks, I would not have been in any way comfortable with coming up with a strategy. Strategy works in practice, and I can't stress that enough. It's not just because it's a classroom thing or an academic thing to learn. You will use your frameworks and theories out in practice, and they're incredibly helpful. So understanding and remembering a lot of theories.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? No? No questions here. Thanks so much, Rebecca.
All right, no problem. Well, you know, good luck with it all.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.